One of the research methods that sociologists use to investigate society, in particular education, is through the use of questionnaires. We started by reviewing quantitative methods from last lesson. A reason might be because they're reliable, because you can measure patterns and trends, and it's favoured by positivist sociologists. Today we're going to be looking at questionnaires. We need to know what they are, how they're used, to give examples of research and evaluate the use with possible alternatives or through methods of triangulation. So we need to think about the strengths and weaknesses of questionnaires, and we do this using our acronym PETFORG as we have done before. We need to know how practical, ethical it is. We need to know what theoretical approach would favour it. We need to know how valid the responses are. We need to know how objective, how reliable, how representative, and how much we can generalise it to the population. So questionnaires are used for measuring things, looking at attitudes, opinions, experiences, beliefs. And so when we're using it for schools, we might be thinking about the attitude to learning, we might be thinking about opinions of the structure of schools, we might be thinking about the belief in what we teach and the content and the curriculum. But with questionnaires, it's always the same question from each respondent. A respondent is the person that takes part in the questionnaire. So we're always looking for we're always asking the same questions to look for their response. Data is analysed and we look at patterns and trends in the data. So usually this is through quantitative methods. So we normally find numbers of things, a number of people that responded in the same way. But these questions can vary. They can be closed questions, they can be open questions, which we'll look at later on. Meaning is ascribed to these patterns, so if we see that most people opt for one particular option, we make assumptions based on that. So we might find that most people find that the curriculum is in fact ethnocentric, and then we make a judgment based on that, why that could be, which cohort it was that responded in that way. Something that's really good about questionnaires, and the reason why they're used so frequently, is because we can collect data over long periods of time, which we call a longitudinal study. We can then compare our findings across different populations over different periods of time and see how things have changed. Types of questionnaires then. We have loads of different questionnaires: self-completion, postal. Self-completion you just do yourself, you don't need anyone there to help you. Postal, it arrives in the post, you post it back. Email, things like SurveyMonkey are really good for that, as are online. Census, that's something that's done every 10 years. The last one we had was in 2011. We'll have another one in 2021. Everyone has to participate in that. There's actually a fine if you don't participate. Or face-to-face, where they literally just ask you the question and fill in the questionnaire for you. There are others, but those are the most common ones. So if you were asked about being in a questionnaire if you'd ever suffered from a sexually transmitted disease, the most likely type of questionnaire in which you'd be honest would probably be something like self-completion, maybe online, maybe postal, but maybe not. But certainly where there's no researcher present, where you would kind of be answering that on your own. The key thing with this is the idea of anonymity. You don't really want to say to somebody that you just met, yeah, I've had an STD, is something that you'd probably be a bit embarrassed about. So you're much more likely to do one that keeps you anonymous. Whereas if it was something less emotionally loaded, you'd probably be quite happy with a face-to-face questionnaire. One thing that we need to consider when someone is actually asking you in person, so through things like face-to-face questionnaires where someone stands and asks you, you have to be aware of social desirability. So as a researcher, you must understand that people will want to impress you or to answer in a way that you seem to want them to answer. So and that can affect the validity of the research with the research. So the person that's responding might be thinking, right, what does the researcher want me to say? What do they want to hear? What will they think of me? Will they judge me? What if someone else hears what I've had to say, and how will they judge me? So you might answer in a socially desirable way that actually isn't a true answer to what you think, but is the way that you think people won't judge you the most. So questionnaires have different question styles. There are open questions, closed and leading questions. Open questions invites the respondents to explain their response in detail, to go into a bit more depth. Closed, you literally just have to take a response from a list, and leading would direct a person to answer in a particular way. We always want to avoid leading questions unless that's what we're researching. So the examples of open questions is if we match up A with C, where you, for example, you might explain how you feel when people skip the line when they're queuing. You might ask a person, how do you feel about the national curriculum? Or what was your experience of your GCSEs like? Number 2, closed questions would be like the example in response A. How do you feel when someone skips a queue? You tick your response: angry, frustrated, happy, not bothered. A bit of a problem with this is that you might not have the answer that you want to tick there. You might tick them all. You might want a don't know. You might not care. But actually having a restricted response, it makes it difficult because it might not actually be the answer that you would give. However, you're much more likely to fill this in because it's so much quicker and easier rather than writing an essay about how you feel. And then a leading question is the example B. Don't you just hate it when someone skips a queue and you've been waiting for ages? You're actually asking them if they feel a particular way rather than asking them simply how they feel. Response rates are really important with questionnaires. Customer surveys usually have a response rate of between 25 and 35%. It's really low. This can affect the sample and therefore the representativeness of the survey that you're doing. People just get bored, they can't bother to fill them in, they might not think it's important. Certainly a postal questionnaire, it's quite a faff nowadays to actually receive it, fill it in, find a post box, send it off. People just don't do it, so they just ignore it. So the things that might make people more likely to respond is usually like having a bribe, like money or a voucher or a guilt trip about, I don't know, maybe something like how do you feel about poverty? Do you think it's wrong that children are starving and stuff like that, to make you feel kind of guilted into answering it. You get more people responding, again, if you have bribery, maybe also if you have, rather than bribery, call it an incentive. Also, if we have like an easy answer question, so if it's just a tick box, if it's a closed question, people can do it really quickly. Sampling frame mostly used for questionnaires are usually things like opportunity samples, things like SurveyMonkey as well on email. They might email you a link. They often take your results, your contact details, from things like purchases in store, club cards, and so within education, it might be your teachers just emailing you a SurveyMonkey survey to see how you felt the year went. Things that affect the results are who actually responds. It could be your little brother or sister that fills in the questionnaire if it's a postal one. It might be people's time constraints, attitudes. You really only find that certain people will fill in a questionnaire, so you only get the response from the people who are likely to fill it in. So those who aren't likely to fill it in might have different opinions, and therefore you won't actually know what their opinion is because they can't be bothered. We use this term operationalisation to talk about how we measure social facts. So it's making social interaction into fact and making it measurable. So, for example, you want to measure how teachers interact with male students in comparison to female. To operationalise this, you could count. This is how we're quantifying these actions. How many times a teacher tells a boy or a girl off, how many times they help boys, how many boys or girls are sat next to their friends. So we're actually quantifying what we see. Essentially, this is through things like a structured questionnaire, structured observation, or structured interview in where you might see this happening. Here's different types and styles of questionnaires. Think about how people would respond, how might it affect your results. Think about whether people would participate or not. And you'll need to evaluate questionnaires using PET-VOG, how practical it is, quite easy, quick, cheap to do, easy to analyse, how ethical. As long as you're not asking anything that's going to cause psychological harm, it's probably fairly ethical. Theoretical, you're probably going to look at your quantitative preferences, so you're positivist using this, unless it's open-ended questions, and so on.